Today I want to talk to you about a very critical decision that's in the lead up to the next state election on the 28th of March in New South Wales. The current government proposes to sell the natural monopoly of electricity to a private owner, most likely a private corporation. A lot of people aren't aware of this proposition. Some are, a lot aren't, and there's a few facts we need to get out onto the table because it's a critical decision, as I said. The New South Wales electricity transmission and distribution network, that is the poles and wires, which allow the electricity to be taken from the generators through the poles and wires and then sent to everyone's house, are currently owned by the New South Wales people. Every person in New South Wales as a taxpayer owns those assets. The government manages those assets on behalf of the people. The reason that governments have traditionally owned such things is because they are what's known as natural monopolies. That is, they are not subject to the natural forces of the market competition. It is not possible for an entrant or multiplicity of entrants to come into the market and compete in an industry like that on price, because the physical barriers of someone being able to put up an extra set of mains and apparatus down every suburban road is not economically or practically feasible. Unlike, for example, the market for haircuts or fruit and vegetables or cappuccinos, where there's a lot of suppliers onto the market, you have ease of exit and entry, and as a result, prices come down as a result of competition. This market is a classic natural monopoly where that price competition is not possible. This is a very crucial point, because if it's sold to a private corporation, what you will then have is a natural monopoly in private hands. A natural monopoly in public hands is accountable to the public through its government. So, for example, if your electricity prices rise or you start getting too many blackouts, you can complain via your government, who owns those assets on your behalf. If they're sold to a private corporation, the accountability will be to a minority of shareholders who are only interested in one thing: an ever-increasing share price. We all know this from our history intuitively, with things like private health insurance, Macquarie Bank buying Sydney Airport. Wherever the private sector takes over monopoly assets, they are accountable to their shareholders, and the way they increase that share price is, number one, to increase prices. Number two, reduce their costs. Their costs are largely composed of labour and capital, so they get rid of as much staff as possible and they don't reinvest in the network. Consequently, what you have is a monopoly asset which used to be owned by the public, which was safe, reliable and relatively cheap, transferred into private hands, whereby the service levels go down, the reliability goes down because they're not investing in the network for capital replacement, they've got rid of most of their staff, and prices go up because they've increased prices by using their monopoly power, to the detriment of the vast majority of those New South Wales taxpayers who used to own it, to the benefit of a minority of shareholders. So that is the fundamental reason why governments should not sell natural monopolies. They are the public's asset for the public's control, to be accountable to the public. I just want to go over some of the structure of the current industry, just for some clarity, so people understand where we are at the moment. The current New South Wales electricity industry is divided up into three sectors. It used to be wholly and solely what we call vertically integrated, from retail through to transmission and distribution back to the generators, was wholly and solely owned by the New South Wales government. Over various periods of time, governments have sold off parts of those networks, the least valuable parts in fact. The generation has been sold off and it is now all privately owned. So the generators that actually produce the electricity from the coal-fired power stations are owned privately. The middle part of the network, the big lump of assets that you see every day when you drive down the road, poles and wires, transformers, the pole transformers, all those things are owned by the public. They are the most valuable part of the network because they form the core asset which allows the electricity to be transmitted from the generation through to the houses. The retail sector is also privately owned. It comprises all the database, the book if you like, of New South Wales customers. And those retailers are supposed to compete on price by buying the electricity off the transmission and distribution networks, companies like Ausgrid and Endeavour, the government-owned entities, and then on-selling it to you, the people. And by buying it off those distributors and on-selling it to the customers, there is a margin in that, and that's how they make their money. That retail market is dominated by three players: Energy Australia, AGL, and Origin Energy, who control about upwards of 90% of the market. As of recently as June, the government deregulated the market so that there is no upper limit on what those retailers can charge. There used to be an upper limit which kept a cap on prices. Those retailers now can charge anything they like. So with market share of those three, what happens is that we have already lost a degree of price control, but the public still have a significant degree of control over the most important part of the network. That is those assets I mentioned, the transmission and distribution assets, which by virtue of staying in public hands can be controlled by the government so that the amount of investment and expenditure is kept to a point where it both satisfies a reliable supply but also keeps prices down. So if the assets, those distribution assets, are now sold, the most valuable piece, to a private corporation, the obvious attraction for a private corporation is to appropriate all three tiers of the electricity market into their hands. So if you had a private corporation from, say, China or America or the UK come in and buy our transmission and distribution network, they could then feasibly buy one of the retail books and then feasibly buy one of the generators. And over a period of time, you would then end up with what we call a vertically integrated market, that natural monopoly I was talking about, now fully appropriated from the public's hands to the private's hands, to the private industry's hands. And there can only be one motivation for that: to maximise their market share, to shut out all possible competition and increase the return to their shareholders by, as I say, reducing investment in infrastructure, in capital replacement and maintenance, getting rid of staff and putting prices up. This is probably one of the worst ideas, the worst policies that's ever been put to the New South Wales people. It was put to previous governments, both Labor and Liberal. It was comprehensively rejected every time, both at the ballot box and within political parties, particularly the Labor Party. And it was also put in other states. Queensland have just had an election whereby they have voted emphatically against privatising their electricity network for the same reason. So it's not a great idea. On top of all that, those assets are so valuable and so profitable that they return $1.7 billion back to the New South Wales government every year, which goes back into funding, cross-subsidising if you like, our public services, the ones that everyone rely on day to day, things like schools, hospitals, nurses, teachers and fire stations. So what we're doing, the proposal is the government wants to sell a valuable monopoly income producing asset, which is an essential service that returns all that money back to the taxpayer every year, and give it to the private sector for what? To buy a West Connex road, to provide a cross-harbour tunnel, which are not income-producing assets. These are dead assets. They are going to take a lot of maintenance and upkeep. They're not giving you the income. If governments were serious about infrastructure, they wouldn't take the lazy approach and privatise and sell off everything, because where does that logic lead you? After 5 years and 10 years, when you're stuck in a traffic jam on the West Connex or the Cross-Harbour Tunnel, we'll be thinking to ourselves, why did we sell off that valuable income producing asset to have this asset, which has now left us in pretty much the same problem we had 10 years ago? The answer for infrastructure spending is to use your assets, your income generating assets, to either borrow against or apportion some of those dividends, those $1.7 billion dividends, into a longer term infrastructure program so that you can afford these things, public transport, good infrastructure, without having to sell your assets. that's the way to go. This is a crucial decision in the current state election. The more people that know about it, the more important it is, because as people get to know what's really being proposed about these assets, the more people support public ownership. Thanks.